All right, everybody, it is 9:05 a.m. in the Pacific Northwest, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the 22nd Annual Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. The first thing I wanted to say is wow, and oh my gosh, we have hundreds of interlibrary loan practitioners and enthusiasts from around the United States and beyond joining us today. And give yourselves a big pat on the back, everybody, because you're among the largest audience of any NWILL event yet, with more than 600 registered attendees. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm David Ketchum. I'm the chair of the 2023 NWILL Conference Planning Committee and Director of Access Services at the University of Oregon Libraries. That's me there on the slide, and my daughters and the Cascade Mountains in the background. And a little about me, I have been working in interlibrary loan for 23 years. I started as a student assistant at the University of Montana and have worked in or managed shops in ILL since that time. This is also my 15th NWILL conference and my 12th year on the NWILL Conference Planning Committee. And what a fantastic honor it is to be with you all here today. Before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. And the first is we are recording this session, and we hope to have it available on our website after the captions are added. But if you need captioning in the meantime, there is a show captions button at the bottom of your screen. And if you have questions for presenters throughout the conference, please use the Q&A function in Whova, not the Q&A function in Zoom, and be sure to upvote your favorite questions. Speaking of Whova, please make sure that you're participating in the conference through the Whova website or the app and not directly from within Zoom. And this will make sure that you're having the full virtual conference experience. If you need help or have any questions for the conference planning committee during the conference, you can send those to nwillconf@gmail.com. The email address is on the slide here, and we are monitoring that account. Next, we do need your feedback. You'll get a link in a post-session survey in the chat after each presentation, and you'll get a post-conference survey through email after the conference over. Please take the time to fill out those surveys so we can plan the next best NWILL conference in 2024. Now that we've covered some housekeeping, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that I'm on, the land in the Pacific Northwest USA, where we've held NWILL in the past, and we hope to again, this land was inhabited by First Nations people for thousands of years before European colonization. The land was stolen through illegal settlements and treaties negotiated in bad faith. And most of us attending the conference today are doing so from a place that has a similar history of occupation, theft, and treachery. NWILL wishes to acknowledge that the indigenous peoples of North America and the Pacific Northwest region have experienced a traumatic history. Native people remain among us, and they're a vital part of our past, present, and future. Also, be nice, everybody. This is a professional conference, and we should treat each other professionally. The full NWILL Code of Conduct is available on the NWILL website, so be sure to check it out. And if anything comes up during the conference, here's how to get a hold of the Conference Planning Committee. We are on social media, so be sure to connect with us and like and share your experiences and use the NWILL hashtag. And next, I want to recognize that while today's the first official full day of the conference, there was a day of excellent programming yesterday. Thank you to Sarah Benson for her fantastic invited talk on moving beyond Contu and interlibrary loan, as well as those who presented double features and gave vendor demos. Today, we have live sessions until 3:15 Pacific time, and that gives everybody time to watch the pre-recorded lightning round sessions on their own, so be sure to take time to do that. I want to mention again that we broke a record this year with more than 670 registered attendees, and the conference would not have been possible without the passion and the hard work of the NWILL Conference Planning Committee. And these committee members here all volunteer. They're all volunteers who've dedicated countless hours and expertise over the last year to bring you this year's virtual conference. And we were also very lucky this year to attract several apprentices who helped with the soft landing in the weeks leading up to the conference. And they've all agreed to apply what they recently learned by serving on the conference planning committee in 2024. Please give our conference planning committee members and apprentices a big deserving round of virtual applause. This is the 22nd NWILL conference, and we've grown substantially since our infancy, especially in the last few years. And we're delighted to announce that NWILL is now officially a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization as of September 2022. And I'd like to say thank you to the veteran NWILL members who worked through the process to get NWILL established and volunteered to serve on the first round of officers on the board of directors. One of the more enjoyable aspects of the planning committee is getting to award attendees scholarships that make their attendance possible. This year, the committee awarded 19 scholarships. Thank you to the scholarship team for making this all possible, and congratulations to all of our scholarship recipients. Thank you also to all of our sponsors. Without the generous contributions from these organizations, we would not be able to provide such a successful and dynamic virtual conference. Be sure to interact with the sponsors throughout the conference on the HUVA conference site. And then finally, before I hand it over to our keynote speaker, I wanted to talk a little bit about the fun stuff. We have 2 ways to win prizes this year, and the first is through participation. To win prizes, you must participate, and not just by attending as many conference sessions as possible. You'll also need to earn points by completing challenges in the leaderboard, like filling out your attendee profile or posting questions to Q&A. The other options for winning prizes are by uploading photos or captioning the photos that others have uploaded. And I'll say there are a lot of cute pictures of puppies and kittens already posted, so be sure to check those out. More instructions on how to play and win are in HUVA under the Win a Prize heading. We'll be giving away 1 grand prize this year, which is free registration to next year's conference. And we also have about 30 $50 gift cards to places like Chewy, Spoonful of Comfort, and Natural Life. We'll randomly draw 1 person's name from attendees at each session to win the gift card of their choice. And we'll also enter everyone who meets specified attendance criteria into a drawing for a gift card of their choice. And of course, winners of the photo upload and captioning contest will also get a prize. So be sure to participate in these fun and engaging activities with your fellow attendees. And again, the exact rules for playing are in the HUVA app under Win a Prize. And now what we've all been waiting for, which is the keynote address for the 2023 NWILL conference, which will be presented by Shannon Pritting from Empire State University. Shannon's role at Empire State focuses on delivering affordable access to research and course materials at New York State's only online public university. He has held positions coordinating library collections, services, and OER activities across 64 institutions within the SUNY system. And he's worked closely with the IDS project to create IDS Logic and Article Gateway. Shannon led the implementation of ALMA and Primo for all 64 SUNY institutions and coordinated the response to and ongoing assessment of SUNY's lapsed contract with Elsevier. Recently, Shannon led the first phase of SUNY's involvement with EBSCO's ebook ILL project, and he served as a consultant for the development of Research Solutions Article Galaxy Scholar. Please join me, everyone, in welcoming Shannon Pritting.
All right, thank you, David. I'm just going to turn my video on for a quick minute just to say hello to everyone. There's 350 people, it looks like, attending, and just wanted to make a connection. Sarah did that yesterday. Sarah Benson did, and it was great to see a face. So I want to thank the NWILL Planning Committee and everyone involved in the conference, and also thank you to the vendor sponsors as well, because without your support, it's much harder to put affordable professional development together. So there's a lot that went into this, and I appreciate everyone's efforts into getting us to this point. So I'm going to stop my video and then get things set up to start presenting. Thank you. Let's stop this. And all right. So I think my audio is good. All right. So thank you for inviting me to talk to you about the future of resource sharing, and I'll try to connect all of these things together: boundaries, nostalgia, and collaboration, and then look at resource sharing as a framework and not necessarily as transactional work that has to happen on a day-to-day basis. That's extremely useful work and valuable work, but I'll try to connect what I've been doing over the last 7 or 8 years to look at resource sharing as a framework, so that you're poised to enter into new areas. I'm going to try to have a little bit of interaction in the presentation so that there's a little bit of feedback from the audience, and I'm going to use Slido. So if you have the ability to open Slido at this point, so slido.com, and the code I will be using throughout is 1344521. So that will pop up on the slides, but just wanted to give everyone a chance to do that if you do have multiple screens or the ability to do that now. All right, so I first wanted to talk a little bit about nostalgia and what I mean about what I mean when I'm talking about nostalgia, and then also some qualifiers. And this is a great video, or a great image from the Christian Science Monitor, which I thought was kind of nice, in that there's these little weeding dots there, so it's a controversial photo, right? So print books and access to print books, or books in general, that's still important. I'll talk a lot about that is a service that is declining in demand from the market, but it's still important, and I'm not discounting that, especially at specific types of libraries like public libraries. But it's mostly about prioritization and working within higher ed environments. They're going to face higher and higher levels of constraints and things that will pull different resources in different directions. So as much as having access to every book that has been printed, or virtually every book that has been printed, can libraries start to put forward a good enough approach with print, depending on what type of library you are. And I'm going to look mostly at productive nostalgia, of bringing the positive forward with resource sharing, but not getting too hung up on having things as they were 15 or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because the time has changed, markets change, demand changes from users, and how do we focus on things that take the positive of the history of resource sharing and move it forward to meet user needs that aren't currently being met. And it comes with a full understanding that some of the things I'm talking about will be taking a digital approach, often involving vendors in the library technology or educational technology or the publishing space. this isn't a panacea. I understand that there's all sorts of problems with access issues when you take a digital approach. So fully admitting that, and that, it's not, perfect, but it is a shift. So the resource sharing community, for me, I just want to start out with saying how much I value the resource sharing community. It's been a while since I've focused solely on resource sharing as far as interlibrary loan. So, I look at resource sharing often as more general, and it's about sharing people, it's about sharing knowledge. But I understand that for many, resource sharing is focused on interlibrary loan. So the resource sharing community, the ILL community, it's great because almost everyone in ILL is focused on helping people. And then secondarily, it's focused on helping libraries. And then typically that is helping libraries help other people. So it's building this community that's focused on the user, which is fantastic. And then typically ILL people are looking for ways that they can add more value to users. They value the user input. And then what is, I think, most unique about resource sharing people are you all get things done and you focus on the day-to-day, moving things forward while also looking at the bigger picture. How do we change what it is that we're doing? How do we change the environment? And then, looking at collaborative ways to solve problems that are as inclusive as you possibly can be, to try to pull in different perspectives, different units, to try to collaborate with as many people to solve problems that are often very challenging to solve. So, typically there's a but, right? There's a but this, right? So I'm going to ask everyone today to start thinking about the evolving environment and how the market for content is changing. So with that, resource sharing needs to update. Interlibrary loan needs to update. And some of this may mean doing less of something that you've been very good at for decades, and doing something different that is valuable in a different way. And hopefully it aligns enough with resource sharing that it still moves resource sharing forward. So we're going to review different areas and activities that the resource sharing community can and should contribute to. And, some of you are already contributing to these different areas. So in some cases, I'm telling you what you're already doing and, adding a layer of analysis, hopefully too. And then also I have a variety of, I won't call them cautionary, I will just say infused with knowledge, case studies of where this current path leads us, where it's higher and higher levels of automation and less demand. Sometimes there are changes where there might be some more demand, but overall, I think we can say that the trends are going down for demand for certain types of material with interlibrary loan. So, and I see a lot of people are already interacting with the poll, which is great. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute, but I wanted to just look back at the last 15 years in resource sharing. So, major advancements of the industry, 2011, there's a little bit of wiggle on the date there. Two things happened. ALMA and the World Share Platform were both released in that year. And to me, that signals the kickoff of what I call the decade of the platform. So in that decade of 2011 to 2021, if you weren't affected in some way by migrating to one of these platforms or considering migrating to one of these platforms, then you're likely an outlier. There are now thousands of libraries on ALMA, and many libraries on WorldShare in one way or another. And then with that decade of the platform, resource sharing becomes inextricably intertwined, so deeply connected with these platform migrations. And more of that resource sharing is focused on a library services platform or the suite of services that many people took years, including myself, of their lives to move to this new service, right? And there's a lot of good things that came with that. Some of the other things in the last 15 years, those of us who were involved in the early days, it seemed like it would take a long time. It didn't take that long for e-journal borrowing to become fully established. Looking at different ways to do ebook lending, but that's still very fragmented. And then slow but steady automation. So the platforms came looking at end-to-end metadata for automation, so discovery, delivery, fulfillment, all connected, and that's really the investment in the platform brings automation because the metadata and the delivery are connected. And then rapid ILL, and then on a smaller scale, IDS, take a more community-based approach, focusing on shared turnaround times, expectations, best practices, etc. And then also, importantly, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this because I think this is, this is going to be what happens more and more, where there was the introduction and the normalization of commercial document delivery as an essential part of ILL, or maybe not essential, but a common part of ILL. And I think that changed things from, buying and lending are now connected in a very useful way. And then, as we heard yesterday, a gradual, but, up until the last few years, a mostly private rethinking of copyright and Contu at least in the US. I know it's different in other places. So I know you've been doing this already, and I'm going to slide the results over. So what do you think the most important advancement in ILL or resource sharing has been over the last 20 years? I think you can all see the word cloud changing here. So about 77, I think it's going to cap out at about 300. So not everyone would get a chance. I'll give you about 10 or 15 more seconds, see if we can get maybe a third or a half. Yeah, so open access, the larger market, article exchange, electronic delivery, those are connected together. Iliad, definitely a software I've spent a lot of time working in. Some people saying Tabasa, Rapid ILL. Yeah, this is kind of what I was expecting. There's a few things like open access, but it really does look at the advancement that has happened in the last 20 years has been mostly focused on technology, right? So it has been focused on vendor-driven technology, and then the community pushing this technology forward to improve best practices, which is fantastic. I don't think we've hit the boundaries of the improvements that can happen because of that, but that's really dominated the last 20 years. So I'm going to then ask one more question, and then I'm going to close this poll and move to another one. Looks like there's one participant typing. All right. So then this question, right? So I saw a lot of community technology that was focused on resource sharing, but really that the decade of the platform has pushed things forward in different ways in the last 10 or 15 years. And I put a poll out in Whova earlier, and it was overwhelmingly yes, which I was kind of surprised by. It looks like we're still in the same way. Maybe is it going to be a rout of 115 to 0? Everyone says yes. I'll give it another minute to see. Oh, we got no, 1%. And then not sure, 15%. All right. Okay, so give it another 30 seconds. All right, so this is interesting, and I think I wanted to put this out there to acknowledge something. Is I'm going to talk a lot about different things that could happen in the last, in the next 10 or 15 years. And this is mostly coming from my perspective, having worked heavily in library technology related to resource sharing over the last 10 or 12 years, right? So everyone loves a new technology that gets things faster, that helps you do your work more efficiently. And I'm just going to challenge you to think about that today, because if we're not at least split about adopting new technologies and thinking critically about them, I think we really run the risk of moving in a direction where we stay hyper focused on what it is that we are doing right now and doing it slightly faster, while not looking for other opportunities outside of traditional areas of interlibrary loan that could make resource sharing even more impactful. So I just want to acknowledge my perspective and focus. I've had a long career with a whole lot of privilege. A lot of people have helped me. My own background comes with, it's privilege. And I've held roles as a higher level project manager at a consortial level, or project director of libraries. But I've also held roles as a practitioner, department head, a systems librarian, and then a consortial leader. I know a lot of this stuff is hard. And this may not be something that's easy for people to connect to. And hopefully, my privileged perspective lends some analysis that could be useful to you. So in the roles that I've had in the last 10 years, resource sharing has been different at every single one. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about today, is resource sharing as a single service is something that I would say we should start to question. And as you start to question that, you hopefully will be more critical about adopting platforms that are bringing forward, or adopting new technology that are bringing forward parts of the resource sharing that you've done in the past and maybe want to do less of, and say, could I spend some of that time doing something different to take my experiences and knowledge and apply it to something that potentially has higher value to your institution. So I started out at a mid-sized comprehensive institution, SUNY Oswego. Resource sharing was important, but it was really a premium research service. Not a lot of money was spent on it. Maybe some faculty purchasing to help out, but we did the best we could with the limited resources. And then I moved to Syracuse University, a research library where it was a core service that there was significant investment in time, financial investment, staffing, to make it the best that we could make it, serve other research libraries and institutions around us. And then I moved to be the library director at SUNY Polytechnic Institute, a recently merged institution that has since unmerged, that was dealing with massive financial issues. So resource sharing became a strategic tool for cost avoidance for subscriptions that were needed but weren't within our budget. And then I spent 6 or 7 years at SUNY System Administration and started to rethink collections access in the age of a new platform that we had just implemented, Alma and Primo. And then at SUNY Empire, looking at it as far as how do I build a collection and an access strategy that uses different components of resource sharing without saying that traditional ILL is really going to drive most of this strategy. So my larger story with resource sharing involves the IDS project. These two photos are of some of the people that I worked with most. I think the one on the right is from the Rethinking Resource Sharing Award, which I thought was fitting in that we all kind of were halfway in the shadows, in the background, trying to move things forward. But two of my longest collaborators were the Bill Jones and Mike Mulligan. And we took a lot of things and said, we want to move this national and have the same focus on service improvement through automation and community and understanding each other and looking at the organizations. So that's where the vast majority of my community involvement has been, is through the IDS project. And then about 5 to 6 years, I call this my focused years, or my era of automation and resource sharing, not to get too grand about it. But I will say that I think everyone would be hard pressed to find 4 or 5 individuals during this time that were more obsessed with automation and service improvement and resource sharing than we were, spending lots of time on the weekends and the evenings looking at it to say, how could we make things better? And that's really where I come to a more critical point of technology and automation at this time in my life of having worked with hundreds of libraries to try to implement new automation, and then connecting it with other change happening in their institutions, both through this work in IDS and then also in the State University of New York system. So what we did with Article Gateway and IDS Logic was really try to look at issues in workflows that were making services harder for other libraries or for the user, and then focusing on how we could solve those problems. So how would we would typically approach them? And I'm finishing up an MBA, so I think in case studies now almost exclusively. So I have several case studies throughout. So hopefully that's helpful for everyone. How we would typically look at logic or article gateway implementations is it would often be bespoke customization that would look at the organization that was happening in the department. And then, typically it would be somewhere between 25 to 50% automation, even for the people who were using components of smart fulfillment or direct request, whatever it was being called at that point. And then, everyone was using Iliad, so there was already pretty good software in the mix. But we would often take it from 25% to 90% automation, and not because we didn't want people doing work, but most of the time those were elements that were put into a workflow that would reduce the turnaround time, or increase the turnaround time, or that would be put in place to deny access to users because there were concerns about workload, things like that. So we would do big data analysis, so often looking at hundreds of thousands of transactions, looking at touches on those transactions to see where they would stop and where they would stop again and where they would stop yet another time, and to see if it was something that could be programmatically addressed, and if that stop was just waiting for some data to be inserted or a check to happen or a connection with another system. And since, at the time that we were doing this, there weren't all these end-to-end systems that have, kind of a streamlined workflow where discovery happens with the metadata and it pushes through everything else. It was connecting together disparate systems. So in many of these cases, it was connecting to external services to try to get data, like, 25% of requests would typically come in with no identifier. And it wasn't because people were typing into request forms. It was because metadata is bad in discovery indexes. And, as much as everyone wants to improve that, it's something you just have to deal with. And we started to harvest ISSNs based on citations. And then we started to look at how do we improve even further once we get to a 90 to 95% level of automation. Is there something that we can do to counter times that people aren't working so that automation gets even better, or purchasing on demand? And then when we had done this enough times, we started to look at the part that was not happening, which was the service improvement component of it. Sometimes this would happen that people would say, yeah, I'm not just processing transactions all day, or I'm not just looking up call numbers, or I'm not just looking up ISSNs or OCLC numbers. I can go do something else. So we were hoping that there would be other services that would be offered to users, things, simple things like hold requests or pulling from shelves that one would think would happen. That typically did not happen, or removing restrictions on number of requests, or having time to do collaborative activities like purchase on demand for books that would take a long time to get there. And then we started to layer in organizational consulting to try to help resource sharing staff or resource sharing department heads to talk to their director or their department head if they were a couple of layers down. And it had middling success. This is really hard work. So automation didn't just change this. So after 5 or 6 years of that, I moved on to focus on other consortial work, spent 3 years implementing ALMA and Primo V at a 60 institution consortia. We also started to try to do, and for a couple of years, we successfully did accessibility reviewing for commonly purchased content or collections or technologies. And then I also worked a lot in shared collections, contract management, subscription management, and collection strategies. Also led research data implementation across many institutions, or at least tried to get an agreed upon framework as well. Managed shared repositories for about 45 of the 60 institutions. And then for the last couple of years, managed the open educational resources and affordability initiatives that were run out of the library services at the State University of New York. So, I know this makes my perspective different in that I went from resource sharing directly into all of these other types of collaboration. And I'm not saying other people aren't doing that. I was chatting in Hoover with back and forth with someone who's doing an EEAAP presentation, which is a equally effective alternate access plans. So I know people are working in these other areas, but I'm listing these out in that I have seen the need for people that are really common in resource sharing to work in other types of consortial or collaborative work, because these were really hard lifts to happen. And when I've worked with others in resource sharing, doing this collaborative work has been much easier because of just the approach of resource sharing staff, librarians, and administrators. So one of the case studies that came out of this, or one of the things that came out of this, just to kind of follow a track that's similar to resource sharing, is in cataloging and what happened at SUNY. So for about 20 years, we had Aleph environments that were on a couple of servers, but they were completely siloed, separate environments. Most of the libraries had a cataloger who would pull down OCLC records, enhance them, put in a whole bunch of things. And then, that was part of a core service. And then what we did is we moved into a single bib environment and really shut out a lot of the ability to modify records. There are a small amount of local fields that can be enhanced or changed, but for the most part, we rely on OCLC syncing with the master record. So you have to be good enough to modify the master record to change our records. So this led to just a major shift in the 3 years, and some of it was pandemic related in the cataloging staffing across institutions. So before we did this, 50 out of 60 had a full-time cataloger. After about 10, and one of the things that I tried to do getting ahead of this before we implemented is to try to create communities of practice with the catalogers to say there are these other opportunities, research data. There's need for people with metadata skills that can help with this, or the repository environment. So a lot of different things, and it just didn't happen because there weren't enough people at the local level who were looking at the changes that need to happen or that were coming with this platform migration that was really going to change how things worked with metadata at these institutions. And I've done this too, and I've seen this on every single promotional flyer or video about the new technology, the new platform, where it's saying like, there's all this automation that's in our system, and whatever you call it, whatever type of fulfillment you call it. And then there's always the hook at the end. And I've done it. I'm not criticizing the people who write this marketing copy, because I've also come with automation that I created and got to know the people and said, like, now you can go do things that focus on the user and get better, right? Better services. But that really does not acknowledge the amount of organizational change that needs to happen and the opportunities that need to be available outside of this core area where that automation is happening. So, if you can't increase services or increase demand for your services, and I know ILL departments, they promote their services and market, and there are things you can do to increase your services, but we're not going back to the days when ILL trends were going up, right? So I think that's the question. That's the main thing I want to interrogate is, if we want to see the benefit of these platforms of automation, and we want to be free to focus on the user, we should start to ask ourselves, what does the user want that we can offer? And that might be beyond what you're currently doing. So looking at resource sharing and collaborative work, just acknowledging some things that definitely happen. So higher education, just in general, there's not a lot of value for hidden work. So if you're not connected to student success, retention, research output, it's hard to make your case and to be seen as valuable. I understand that. The higher up you get in the hierarchy of higher education, the harder it is to make that that value seen. And thinking about that is, the automation is really something that people see as, it's going to free me up from this low value hidden work to go do things that the organization is going to value. So, there is that promise, right? And then in resource sharing, the transactional thinking is both a strength and a weakness, because the notion that you have to provide a high level of service extremely fast and be user oriented is part of what I consider transactional thinking, of like, how do I give this user the best experience on this transaction? That's an extremely great strength of resource sharing people. But when it becomes a focus on the workflow and a focus on how the transactions move through the workflow, and not an ability to see that there might be something different that needs to happen that isn't working transactions, that is where it can sometimes become challenging. And then often what I see too, and I have lots of jokes that are organizationally oriented, lots of dad jokes too, but what I typically say is that in higher education, RFPs drive more strategic direction than any strategic plan ever does. And I have to just acknowledge that's why the age of the platform has been beneficial, is that many of these are RFPs that are 5, 10, 15-year contracts. And there's a lot of movement around moving towards these new platforms, because that high level, really expensive, or maybe not expensive, but you know, a lot of money is invested in it. There's a lot of focus, and that's often hard to get just working interdepartmentally. So some of the lessons I've learned from collaborative work that is not resource sharing, and another thing that people who've worked with me know is like I have lots of weird aphorisms that I bring up, and typically when people just rant about silos, I have a saying that I like to say. It's silos feed farms. Right? I've worked on a lot of farms. My wife's parents are farmers, and you know, silos are essential parts of farms, but you have to see them as something that feeds the larger farm, not that just sits out there and lets the, you know, the food rot in it, pretty much. So so that's one of the things to think about is siloed thinking. It should in some ways be appreciated because there's a lot of specialization. There's a lot of high level knowledge that is in the you know, in these areas of focus, and interlibrary loan is one of these. You know, there's a lot of high level bibliographic searching, user oriented activity, a lot of great things going on. And then, you know, that's really hard to bring that siloed approach into serving the larger organization because there's usually not coming with it professional growth, the change management. The leaders are all on the same page of like, this is going to take us from point A to point B, helping people move forward. They're like, well, you know, somebody's implementing this this system, or the vendor gave us a 50% off coupon at the end of, you know, that expires in 30 days, right? There are all of these things that are coming from outside forces that are moving things forward, and then not enough of the professional growth, change management. And then, you know, sometimes there is professional development. People are sent to conferences, or, you know, you subscribe to online professional development, but not enough attention is played you know, to lay the ground for the collaboration between departments or institutions to make it successful. And then, you know, that's challenging work. That's something that resource sharing people are good at, but there does need to be a higher level administrative push on that too. So that brings me to just a couple of different futures for resource sharing. One, I think this is the path we're headed on: increased automation, more focus on end-to-end discovery to delivery, you know, an ecosystem. And there's positives to that. And then reduce staffing in departments at all levels in resource sharing, just period, right? The more automation you get, the more reduction in staffing, unless there's something else that will happen in that resource sharing department. And then at some point, those staffing in departments will become so low and not, you know, not valued enough that there'll be additional limitations on user services, even with the automation. And then that leads to less awareness. That is, you know, that resource sharing brings less awareness of what the problems are, what the path forward is for access, or the things that resource sharing brings to the other departments. And then I think typically too, what this will bring is more reliance on vendors or consortia. You know, they're an important part in this ecosystem for future directions. And that will mean that you'll have less connection to tailoring something to your institution, and you'll have to look at it as, what is someone providing me? And then I think ultimately that brings us to where we have this role stratification. And I think it's Peter Reinhardt who coined this phrase of above or below the API, looking at, you know, kind of this stratification in a lot of technology companies where, you know, you're either telling the software what you want it to do at a, you know, at an administrative level, or having the software tell you what to do and not having a lot of investment in you know, a future that is co-created with you. So I think in the near future, we could say that this might be above or below the AI instead of the API. That's probably where we're headed in the next 5 years. And you know, I definitely think technology automation is part of the solution moving forward, but we can't become so hyper focused on connecting our services to technologies that ultimately what's left in resource sharing are roles that are below the API or below AI or below the platform. So how do we do that? How do we counter this stratification? First thing, and this is going to be a challenging one because so much of a consortium, what a consortium does is it kind of equals out a lowest level of services that a library could offer. On some mixed consortium, some it's different, but you know, in some cases, the libraries are reliant on the consortium or the system to move them forward because there's not enough support at their institution. So it's really looking at what is valued in the institution, or if you're completely reliant on the consortia, you have to look at the consortia, what's valued there, and try to contribute in that area. And then looking for a blurring of boundaries where you can take all of the great things, all of the great you know, knowledge approaches that's happening in resource sharing, and say, what are the initiatives that are highly valued, that are not going to be automated, that we can start to connect to. And I'll give some examples of that. That's been a lot of the work I've done since moving out of primarily resource sharing. And then really start to prepare for work that's far less oriented to transactions, collections, and then looking at what is it about resource sharing that is a core value and not a connection with, you know, the work that you're doing, and how do you improve that through technology enhancement. So that brings another future for resource sharing if we shift approaches, which is, you know, the automation, end-to-end systems, the platform, removing a lot of that manual work, and then looking at resource sharing staff spending more time in resource sharing, but in higher level strategic directions that are valued by the institution, or, you know, in the library, if you're a large enough institution, that just providing more value to the library might be enough for you. And then looking at where resource sharing workflows or approaches can be connected over boundaries with other departments. And I know many are doing that. There's a lot of fusing between collections and sometimes, you know, acquisitions. And I think there's room for more of that boundary crossing. And that's hard work to do. And this is, you know, kind of an image of barbed wire, right? We want to look at boundaries, not that they're insurmountable and can't be, you know, can't be crossed, but that they can be something that invites a conversation. You know, it's not something that, you know, what I've often said is that there's a lot of gerrymandering of boundaries in libraries. It's all about who's most influential or political, and the boundaries have kind of woven because of someone's like career effect on the institution, and not because of what makes sense to provide value to the user as well. And you know, the crossing of the boundaries can help focus on the bigger picture, expose resource sharing staff to what's happening, that's similar work going on in other areas that could, you know, that could help move things forward. And, you know, there still will be a need for interlibrary loan and resource sharing, but hopefully that automation frees people up to focus on the user in these new ways. All right, so another poll here. Let me advance it real quick. And here we go. So what area in libraries do you think best aligns with resource sharing? Give everybody just a minute. All right, collections, access services, acquisitions, serials, okay. Circ, yep, see that a lot, you know, kind of staying in the same mega department, you know, access services. Circuit acquisitions, collection management. All right, so somebody was talking about graduate research services. So Scalcom, I like that one. All right, archives, that's a good one. And I think somebody's presenting about special collections later in the, that's one that I didn't have in my slides, but that's definitely a good place for collaboration. All right, should be its own thing. I like that. In some scenarios, I agree with you. It's not a one size fits all approach. Yep. IT, all right, that's interesting. Give a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds. We're at about 100. 6 people are typing. Wait till it dies down. All right. All right. So, all right. I like the one that it's the nervous system, you know, and you know, the nervous system feeds so many things. That's a good thing. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna move forward here. Good input. So I'm going to just talk through a resource sharing framework where how I envision it is each institution should look at resource sharing as its own key business unit. This should have its own goals and strategic direction, and not just say, you know, we hope to go from 92 to 94% fill rates, right? That's historical transactional work. Looking at it as far as what are the opportunities in the next 5 or 6 years that are, you know, that are key things that could add value across multiple areas. So as we're looking at this framework, you know, and this is a lot like case studies in business. It's sometimes stating the obvious and infographics, right? So really looking at the uniqueness. So I would say resource sharing should be different at different institutions. And one of the things I did, I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours doing organizational consulting with library directors during the pandemic, looking at their budget, or in some cases doing that with the provost if there was no director. And, you know, I would see a small 700 FTE community college taking the same approach to resource sharing as a research library. And I would show them like 40% of your budget and staffing is dedicated to interlibrary loan. Do you see that as a strategic direction? You know, are you supporting that in your programs? And everyone was like, absolutely not. And it's challenging to move away from that, but I think you have to look at your institutional constraints, see how you're different, and see how you could do interlibrary loan or resource sharing differently if that puts you in a better scenario as you're, you know, as a contributor to your institution or library success. And then you also have to say, is this an area that's ripe for collaboration with other departments or institutions? There's some areas that are just really challenging to collaborate on. I tried to do a lot of shared procurement, and I think I learned that's not an area that's ripe for a whole lot of collaboration in some scenarios. Contracting, maybe, not procurement. There's too many different interpretations. So you have to be mindful that some collaborative areas are riper than others for actually moving forward. And then what are the trade-offs that will happen if you say, we will no longer get print books outside of our consortia, and I'm a 2-year institution? There's a trade-off. You might make 1 or 2 faculty or 10 faculty unhappy, or you might have to deny a request to a patron who is trying to do high-level research. So there's trade-offs to everything, and you should acknowledge them and think strategically, but you shouldn't let them hold you up from doing a rigorous analysis. And then who are the benefits, or who are the stakeholders who are benefiting, and how are they benefiting? Really looking at it as you have a lot of people that you're serving, a lot of different people, and try to analyze what those benefits are for everyone. So some of the things that I just want to, acknowledge with the resource sharing framework is that all libraries have constraints and trade-offs, and some of them are really hard to overcome. But that doesn't mean that you should stick with doing the traditional things you've done in the past if that's not what's going to make you successful. And then, you really have to look closely at the orientation to the print collection and how that would serve the institution as a whole. Another thing that I've spent hundreds of hours on is listening to library directors complain to me about OCLC and the costs. And I come back to them and say, but you get all of these things through OCLC. If you don't value them, you can always cancel. And they would say, I don't want to. I want all of these things. The print collection still matters to me, and exposing my collection. And I have to say to them, like, you can't have it both ways. There are trade-offs. You have to make a decision. And most of the time, the libraries would just find the money from something else to pay for resource sharing. In some scenarios, that's a good idea. In other scenarios, if you would apply a different framework, you would probably make different decisions about, how you're using your resources. So trying to implement a resource sharing framework, first thing I would say, and how I've approached it at multiple institutions, looking at where the area is that would be most beneficial by aligning more. So there's a lot of opportunity to help with cost avoidance and subscription strategies, affordability strategies, OER, things like that. And then looking where collaborative work is just simply masking larger access issues that resource sharing people could likely help with. And then, improving the situation by connecting people together that might not have happened because of resources. A lot of things, that maybe not missing, but that, the framework doesn't necessarily acknowledge the impact of that. Technology is often something that libraries aren't choosing on their own. And the consideration of technology, there's a lot of different components that go into that. And, some of those things might take more of your activity than, or more of your time than you would want to. And then oftentimes leaders or institutions, both in the library or the institution, they may not have strategic priorities. So you can't look to them for that direction. In some cases, that might be the leader's issue. And in other cases, it's just it's highly problematic at the institution. So just staying open or staying relevant is the focus. And that's hard to make large moves away from one area to a different area if you don't get that direction from higher. And lots of considerations with collections. It's really hard to change, to move directions. It often will take years and years, which is what happens in most other things with higher ed as well. It takes years. So some other things just to look at as far as issues or challenges with applying a resource sharing framework. So many see access to the entire or virtually all of the entire scholarly record as something that's a universal right. If you're in a higher ed institution in the United States, you should have access to everything that's in WorldCat or the largest discovery index that is available. And then there's also things like complex environments with unions, et cetera, that make it hard to shift multiple positions or business units. This isn't easy work. And then, it's really easy to look at the core work if you're overwhelmed and you've lost staff. I get it. Not saying this is easy. And then in some cases, if you become too focused on your institution, you might not have enough of a perspective to look at things that need to move forward to create a network effect, which is going to increase more access like interlibrary loan and resource sharing currently does. So a couple of case studies, and I know I'm kind of running a little low on time here. Right, David, I think I've got about 20 more minutes, right?
Yeah, that's right. Plenty of time.
Cool. All right. So applying resource sharing framework to a couple of different scenarios and cases. So article processing. So I know this is typically one that lots of people, you get a lot of kudos, right? You fill a request in 10 minutes and the faculty or a student sends you an email back like, oh, this was awesome. This was just what I needed for my paper and I got it in almost no time. It's great, right? I get it. It's work that people are valuing. when you deliver something well, right? Or when you deliver something quickly, or when you find something that's hard to find, or you help them out. And, I would say this is usually seen as something that's a positive without question. So you're improving access. There's a lot of efficiency there. And then, start to apply a resource sharing framework to this to say, like, okay, this is great. This is a good traditional service. Are there other root issues that we're filling the gap for, and could we change things and realign so that we're approaching things differently? So even if you're delivering something in 5 hours, would it be better if you were partnering with collections to deliver access to an article immediately or within 10 seconds or in the browser versus going through all of the work and all of the effort to get somebody a PDF that someone could provide for a small amount of money immediately to your user? So this is one that I found, and I've had this conversation with 75, 100 libraries, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And many people can't get over the hurdle that one is, that ILL and delivering articles via ILL is the best way to do it. So I'm going to just advance here and then ask the question, would you advocate for unmediated articles that didn't involve ILL if your library could afford it? So let's take that part of it, because don't want to say like, no, it's too expensive. All right. So if your library could afford it, would you advocate for services for article delivery via a document delivery provider instead of ILL? All right, so it's starting to get to the point I'm thinking we're going to get to 50-50, not sure or no. We'll see. Give it another 30 seconds. Try to get over 100. All right. Okay. So this is something I've talked with, a lot of people about of, at what point does it make sense to say, let's look at ILL as a connecting point outside of other article delivery that is unmediated, unless everyone becomes comfortable that you can use a bot or you can use automation to directly fill from someone else's collections. Interlibrary loan is always mediated in some way. Like some person has to has to get a request and hit five or six buttons or 3 buttons to fill that article, right? So, this is something I'm starting to look at. Big data, hundreds of thousands of transactions, and then just do some cost modeling to say, like, what would the price points be to say, part of the time or all of the time, how much would it cost to fill everything via a document delivery provider? Would a publisher be willing to lower the costs on back files? Because honestly, they're not making any money off of ILL. And, if they got $5 for an article from 1995, that's better than the $0 they're currently getting. Understanding that publishers have to make money to stay in business. I want them to make as little money as possible. I'm like all of you, but I understand they have to make some money. So, that's one of the things of looking at, of just not continuing for another 15 to 20 years about automation with ILL borrowing, but look at, alternate models that could be blending boundaries between departments. So the other case study I'm going to look at is whole ebooks. And I spent, a year in the ProQuest ebook pilot. I think SUNY's still involved in that. So this has been a bit complicated. I know services to provide extended access to ebooks. It's challenging to do that with EBA or DDA programs. But there's already really good programs that allow you to really expand access to ebooks, especially if you participate in a consortium. In some ways, like the whole ebook ILL lending is solving a problem where there's already really good tools. You know, we're trying to make it where there's a lot of clicking and users waiting, etc. So you have to ask yourself what value is going to be added by creating that robust infrastructure for whole ebook lending. And could this be more efficiently delivered if you don't try to approach it in a traditional ILL way? So, you know, this is something you apply the framework to say, like, how is this really benefiting me as an institution? And how do we handle ebooks? And then, you know, could we blend approaches where it's partially, you know, DDA, it's partially other levels of access to ebooks, and, you know, only using ILL when it's absolutely essential, where it's something that is rare and could not be temporarily licensed, etc. So another case study looking at shrinking the deal. I was involved in the, you know, the SUNY went from about 3,000 to 248, 249 Elsevier journals. So we went to about 1/10 of the size of the previous deal, provided multiple years of wraparound services to try to help libraries develop access models that weren't just subscriptions or interlibrary loan. Only 2 libraries implemented these different strategies. And, you know, we found that we now are paying about 50% of what we were paying for the previous deal. And there's almost no, you know, there's almost no effect on interlibrary loan or document delivery, but there's still this widespread feeling that our users are missing something, right? So, you know, we couldn't get people to take the approach of, you know, don't only focus on interlibrary loan, focus on other access strategies. And, you know, to kind of take that 1/10 approach, I was watching the LIBER or Liber keynote from Chris Borg from MIT, and they talked about what they did is put everything in their Elsevier deal that they didn't subscribe to into unmediated purchasing, and only spent 1/10 of what they spent before that deal. So, you know, that cost avoidance, if you're not trying to force it into traditional ways or traditional approaches, can often be highly valuable, and, you know, for the most part, isn't going to break the bank, but it does require that cross-departmental collaboration. And I could only get that to happen at a couple of places out of the 60 that we tried to shift. Another case study, you know, how could something that would be very similar to resource sharing? I think, you know, resource sharing people always want to help a user get access to something, overcome barriers. I'm sure all of us have seen in one way or another textbook issues coming to us through resource sharing. OER requires all of this cross-departmental collaboration, adopting best practices, helping each other out. And that's something, you know, I saw happen for about a year and a half in SUNY, and then the approach we took for a couple more years, and I think it's starting to become a little bit more blended now, is, you know, look to a vendor to address the problem for us. We partnered with Lumen Learning and Carnegie Mellon's Open Learning Initiative, and focused only on a platform that had adaptive licensed courseware built on OER. And, you know, that led to a spike, and then it led to a decrease in OER use, because there wasn't that cross-departmental collaboration, the focus on community that resource sharing does really well, and to help others at other at other institutions overcome obstacles. So just gonna finish up here, couple thoughts, and then we'll have some questions. But I asked myself, you know, what needs to happen to create a golden age in resource sharing? And you can probably tell, I think there's probably needs to be a shift in approach. But, you know, how do we create this golden age in resource sharing where we're solving big problems and we could be implementing technology that solves big problems, but we could be just implementing new technology that does the things that we were doing slightly faster in the cloud, right? So some of the things we need to do, focus on identifying those needs and the strategic directions that might be different than what we're currently doing. And then, really start to do heavy analysis on the library technology vendor or publisher, consortia, individual library partnerships, and say, like, what makes sense for all parties involved? Where can I do less of something and more of something else? And then I would ask the question, is it possible right now, or is it helpful or productive to have common visions for resource sharing? Like, I look at the Big 10 academic alliances, discovery to delivery, what I see as a common vision, it's a lot focused on a technology that provides a seamless user experience, which is applaudable, but it doesn't necessarily move forward with how do you expand outside of resource sharing? And I'm not sure that common visions typically do that, because there's enough difference in institutions that would be challenging. So, is that even possible, or should we start to see some more fragmentation and connecting into other areas in the institution or the library? And then the commonality is something that's more generalized, and saying, like, true resource sharing, not collections sharing based on technology. It's about sharing resources and common goals to provide a high level of impact to whatever it is that you find is most valued at your institution. So some of the concrete steps in applying a framework is really to look at your institution and your consortia, looking at partnerships and goals that you think resource sharing could connect into, and see how you get into those conversations. And then start to ask yourself, in a way that's respectful, in a way that's mindful, what can we do less of because it's less relevant to our users? And that might mean not doing it at all in 5 years, or doing far less of it, so that you can take those resources and do something else. And then ask, what are some things that resource sharing staff could be doing that would be highly valuable, that's different? All right, so now, and I will say there is a profanity filter, so please don't roast me too bad, because it will get filtered. Hopefully this was thought-provoking. I've been thinking about these things for a very long time, and I appreciate the input you have, and you listening to this, and engaging with this in just a few minutes. I really tried not to be frightening. It's okay, I think. Good background noise. I think I like that one. I'll use that one as a. All right, fear mongering. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that. So ask about it. Yeah. Yeah, obsolescence of job. That's part of some things that really it challenges me, right? It's something that I don't want to become obsolescent or obsolete. Sorry. All right, give it another 30 seconds, and then David, I think we'll open it up. All right, got about 66. All right, check the chat. Okay, so must be there's good nuggets in the chat. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop my share and then turn my video on. And then we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, right, David? All right. So I can't see Huva, so because I think Zoom and Huva don't play well together as when you're presenting all that well. So I'll be relying on someone else to relay those to me.
That's okay. Thanks, Shannon. I'll field the questions here. Everyone, if you have questions for Shannon, please use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature in Huva. You can upvote those questions. And if Shannon doesn't get time to answer them today, he can still answer them after the session and during the conference. So Shannon, there were a number of questions that came through I see a trend is questions about how this might apply to public libraries or smaller libraries.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to acknowledge. My perspective was focused on academic libraries. And I will say, in public libraries, I think, traditional ILL might still be, a main core service where, focusing on that because I don't know, I'm perhaps the heaviest ILL user of our public library. I work completely remotely. My institution has no physical library, so I rely on the public library. And they are really, really good at moving print books around fast. So I think in that case, public libraries are so much further ahead than academic libraries that they stopped trying to have their own print collection so long ago that like that floating collection is working really well in public libraries. But, certainly there's lots of other services public libraries offer, do a fantastic job. And I think, resource sharing people at public libraries could connect into those.
All right. There's some curiosity about how collaboration is taking place between resource sharing and other library departments. Can you provide some examples?
Yeah. So, I think the ones that are easiest to see are with collections. And, when there is a deliberate focus on blending the user experience and looking at access strategies. So, looking at, implementing unmediated article purchase on demand to help the libraries to save a lot of money on subscriptions. And then that's typically blended into a resource sharing type workflow. It just might be kicking out to a vendor for that fulfillment. Some other things that I've been involved in, when we were looking at accessibility reviewing, there was a large mandate from SUNY that everything that was purchased that was technology related needed to have an in-depth accessibility review. And most of the institutions were like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, right? And the libraries were saying, how do I do this? We had a lot of resource sharing people connect into that because they were interested in it, because they were user oriented. And then they were also really good at learning new technology and best practices. So they were successful contributing to group reviews that we peer reviewed for accessibility. So that's another example of, it's different than what had been doing, different than what you would typically see. But I saw a lot of resource sharing staff just be fantastic accessibility reviewers.
Thank you. That's also a great discussion to have with other fellow attendees. I'm sure that there are all sorts of models out there. Shannon, you mentioned less demand in resource sharing. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Where are you seeing less demand across the board?
So less demand, definitely, and part of this is my perspective. The SUNY system demand is just slow level down. I know there are libraries where that's not happening, especially if you have a really well-established service. Also looking at trends in the IDS project, because we pull data for that, less demand there as well. And then, part of implementing library services platforms is you get to know other consortia really well. So other North American consortia that I regularly connect with also are having the same experiences. So is it a universal experience? Probably not, but I think it's a pretty general trend that in the aggregate is happening. Sorry, I answered that as if that person was questioning my authority on it. I didn't see it that way, just as much as like, yeah, I get it. Like there are definitely libraries where it's increased for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing, I think, some some effects of the discovery and delivery systems that you described earlier, kind of reversing that downward trend that we've been seeing over the last several years. Speaking of, there's some curiosity in the questions about whether the SUNY system, after switching to ALMA, is considering moving to their newer resource sharing system, Rapido, for ILL.
So no, not to my knowledge. I've not been involved in consortial higher level administrative work for about the last 8 months in SUNY, so something could have changed. But as of 8 months ago, no, I don't think that there's anything that was keeping them from it, but heavy investment in ILLiad, and about 40 of the SUNY libraries have that bespoke customization and IDS logic that I think they would have to, it would be painful to migrate, because there's just so much complicated configuration workflow that would have to happen. And, I'm sure Rapido is a great system, but could it do the 99% customization that's happening, or 99% automation that's happening on some of these campuses? Probably not. But I imagine some will implement in the near future, probably.
Thank you. We are past time. It's 10:31. Thank you very much, Shannon. That was a very inspirational and interesting talk. I'm sure you'll continue to get questions from attendees throughout the conference and probably after. Everyone, thank you for attending. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.